The morning sun rose slowly over the high white towers of Valmar. The city glowed like gold in the light, and the bells rang across the valleys to call the people to another peaceful day. For 10 years, Queen Alara had ruled with a kind heart and steady mind. Her people loved her, for she spoke clearly, listened carefully, and always tried to act with fairness. Yet among her closest nobles, there were still whispers and doubts about the man she had married. Ethan was quiet. He had no noble title, no name, from a proud house. Before meeting the queen, he had been a teacher, known only for his calm nature and simple ways. He had come to the palace many years ago to deliver a collection of books about ancient history. The guards had almost turned him away, but the queen herself had seen the curiosity in his eyes and invited him into the royal library. That single meeting changed everything. Alara found peace when talking with him. His words had no tricks or flattery, unlike the polished manners of the court. He spoke of how kingdoms rose and fell not from battle but from the hearts of those who led them. Alara had spent her whole life surrounded by councils full of pride, so she found his honesty refreshing. Over time, one visit became many. People began to notice the way her laughter softened when he entered the hall. When she chose to marry him, the kingdom was shocked. The oldest nobleman whispered that she had lost her judgment. They said a queen must marry someone of equal blood, someone with power and armies, not a man of common birth. But Alara did not listen. She had seen something in Ethan that no one else did, the calm strength of a man who needed no throne to know his worth. Life in the palace changed after that. Ethan did not sit in royal councils unless asked. He spent much of his time in the library or working with the craftsmen in the lower courtyard. He studied old maps, repaired tiny pieces of metal, and drew patterns in notebooks until his fingers were stained with ink. Some said his mind was strange, lost in dreams of old machines and forgotten worlds. Others simply called him the queen's quiet husband and left him alone. Alara often visited him in his workshop. The smell of warm iron and wood polish always filled the air. She would stand by the open window, watching the sunset while Ethan spoke about his ideas. He told her stories of secret cities hidden beneath oceans and giant bridges that could sing when the wind passed through them. Most people would have laughed, but Alara listened closely. She could see how deeply he believed in what he imagined. At night, when the palace halls were silent, they would sit together by the fire. Ethan would read from his notebooks, and Alara would close her eyes, letting the rhythm of his voice carry her far from the heavy duties of her crown. He never spoke to her as a queen, only as a woman he deeply respected and loved. That simple truth gave her heart more peace than all the gold in her treasury. Still, the council grew uneasy. Some thought he was dangerous, not because of what he did, but because he did nothing. No greed, no plans for power, no army at his command. His quietness was unexplainable, and the unknown always breeds fear. They began to question if he was hiding something from them. One evening, Lord Harvin, the oldest of the advisors, spoke harshly before the queen. "Your Majesty, the people love you, but they wonder if your husband truly serves Valmar. He shows no pride in his position, teaches no soldiers, he commands no fortress. A ruler's husband must be stronger than silence." The words cut deeply, but Alara answered with calm grace. Silence can be strength when spoken by the right soul. Ethan heard of the council's doubts later, yet he said nothing to defend himself. He only smiled at his wife that night and told her, "It is right for them to wonder." Trust earned slowly lasts longer than fear won quickly. His voice was gentle, but his eyes held something she could not name, something firm, waiting like a river beneath smooth stones. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain. In the distance, thunder rolled over the hills, faint but growing. Neither of them yet knew that soon the peace of Valmar would be shaken, and the quiet man whom many underestimated would reveal the truth of who he really was. As she watched him working late into the night, sparks of soft light flickering around his tools, Alara found herself thinking that perhaps the whispers were wrong. Perhaps greatness does not always wear a crown or carry a sword. Sometimes it stands quietly beside you, smiling through the storm that others cannot yet see. The days of peace in Valmar began to fade. The sky stayed overcast for long hours, as if the land itself waited for trouble. Messengers brought grim news to the palace. Border towns had seen fires far in the distance. Riders returning from the hills spoke of great armies moving behind dark banners. The neighboring realm of Dareth, long bitter about past losses, was gathering its forces once again. Queen Alara stood on the wide balcony of her chamber, silent and thoughtful. Far below, the streets of the capital buzzed with unease. Families hurried to store food, and soldiers drilled until nightfall. For years, she had kept the peace through treaties and honor. Now she faced a danger that words could not tame. Inside her heart, she wondered if Valmar was ready for another war. Ethan worked quietly in his workshop while the queen met with her generals. He heard the sound of marching feet echo from the courtyard below. His hands, steady as always, shaped fine metal pieces into forms no one else in the kingdom understood. Old gears, polished stones, and shining threads of copper covered his work table. He rarely looked up, but his mind never wandered. He could feel the storm approaching. Later that evening, Alara came to him, her long robe trailing softly on the floor. She found him sitting by the fire, studying one of his designs. He looked up and smiled, but he could see worry in her eyes. "Ethan," she said quietly, "the kingdom is afraid. The envoys of Dareth sent a message this morning. They demand gold, land, and control over our trade routes. If we refuse, they will attack within the week." Ethan's expression did not change. He placed his drawing aside and stood. "And what do you wish to do, Alara?" "I cannot give them what they demand," she answered. "To surrender would shame our people. But their armies are strong, and ours are tired. We have weapons, but they are old. I fear we cannot stand against their machines." He stepped closer, taking her hand gently. "You once trusted me when all the council doubted your choice. Will you trust me again?" Alara looked at him for a long moment. There was no trace of fear in his voice, only quiet certainty. "I trust you," she said. "But I do not see how you can help in a war. You are a teacher, a thinker, not a soldier." Ethan smiled faintly. "That may be true, yet strength wears different faces. Give me 3 days, and promise me one thing: no one will disturb the valley beyond the cliffs." She hesitated, confused, but unable to ignore the calm faith he carried like a flame. "Very well. The valley will be yours." That night, Ethan left the palace with a small group of workers and several wagons filled with materials. He gave no explanation, only instructions that were clear and simple. The guards watched him go and whispered among themselves. Some thought he was running away. Others guessed he was building some hidden refuge for the queen. At dawn, Alara stood alone by the balcony once more. The air was cool, and the eastern sky glowed faintly red. She wanted to believe her husband had a plan, but doubt crept into her mind like a shadow. Even a wise mind could not stand against iron and fire. For 2 days, strange sounds came from the distant valley at night, deep humming noises. Bursts of light that flashed across the clouds, and a low, rhythmic pulse, as if the heart of the earth had begun to beat. The people of Valmar grew restless. Rumors spread that the queen's husband was performing secret magic. On the 3rd day, Ethan returned. He wore his usual simple clothes, except for a faint silver mark that shimmered on his collar where a spark had burned through the fabric. His hands were dusty and his eyes seemed brighter than before, as if they had seen something beyond this world. He went to Alara, who had been meeting with her frightened council. The general stood silent as he entered the chamber. Ethan bowed lightly, then turned to the queen. "It is ready," he said. "Our land will not fall." Before anyone could question him, a messenger burst into the hall, breathless. "Majesty, riders come from the valley. There are shapes of light rising into the sky." Alara moved to the window with the others. Far across the plains, she saw immense figures standing on the horizon, tall and shining like pillars of dawn. They moved slowly with grace, their joints glinting like living metal, and above them floated smaller craft that shimmered blue against the dark clouds. The generals gasped. None of them had ever seen such things. Only Ethan remained calm. "They will guard the western border," he said quietly. "They will not harm unless they are attacked first." The queen turned to him, astonished. "How did you make them?" He looked at her with gentle eyes. "Sometimes old knowledge only waits to be remembered," he said. "And now it remembers you, my queen." For the first time in many days, Alara felt hope stirring in her chest. Outside, thunder rolled again, but it sounded different this time, not like warning drums of war, but like the heartbeat of a power finally awakened for the sake of peace. The morning after Ethan's strange return, the whole kingdom seemed to hold its breath. The people still spoke in surprise about the lights that had filled the valley through the night. Farmers near the cliffs told stories of seeing shining shapes move through the mist like gentle spirits guarding the land. No one truly understood what they had seen, but every heart felt both fear and wonder. In the grand hall, Queen Alara met again with her council. The room was filled with tension. The nobles wanted answers, and the generals wanted to know what kind of power had suddenly appeared in their land. Alara sat tall in her chair, her silver crown gleaming softly in the morning light. Ethan stood beside her, calm as ever, his hands clasped behind his back. Lord Harvin, the oldest advisor, leaned forward. "Your Majesty," he said, "the people speak of miracles. They say the king's husband has built soldiers of light. They say the ground itself obeys his call. Is it true?" Ethan met the man's sharp gaze, his voice steady. "What you call miracles are only the gifts of learning. The machines I built now stand ready to protect Valmar. They need no food, no sleep, and they follow the will of peace." The council murmured uneasily. Some were amazed, while others were afraid. Count Diran, proud and suspicious, frowned. "Machines cannot fight like men. This is some trick. Our entire army will fall." Ethan gave a faint smile. "Then let the machines speak for themselves." He lifted a small metal piece from his pocket and set it on the marble table. From that tiny piece of metal came a soft sound, like a hum too deep to be heard clearly. The floor beneath their feet trembled slightly, and a low blue light glowed through the great windows. "Step outside," Ethan said simply. Together, the queen, the nobles, and the guards went to the balcony. Below, the courtyard had filled with shining figures. They were tall and strong, shaped like men but built from silver and smooth crystal. They stood in perfect lines, waiting for command. When Ethan raised his hand, they bowed in unison with quiet grace. Gasps spread through the crowd below. Soldiers and servants fell to their knees, calling out the queen's name. Lord Harvin could not find his voice. Even the proud Count Diran stared in disbelief. Alara turned to Ethan, her eyes wide. "You built these alone?" He shook his head. "No one builds alone. Every thought, every lesson, and every dream that came before me lives within this work. They are protectors, born not from power, but from patience." A messenger ran into the courtyard, shouting that the armies of Dareth were only 2 days away. Their scouts had crossed the hills and would soon reach the valley. The news made the captains rush to ready their men. Lara's calm wavered, but she looked to Ethan. He nodded slightly, as if this had all been expected. That night, Ilara stood beside him on the highest tower. The wind blew across the dark fields. In the distance, fires marked the enemy's approach. The quiet hum of Ethan's creations filled the air below them. "I do not understand it," she said softly. "Ow. Could you know so much? You never spoke of this knowledge before." He looked at the stars above them with a thoughtful expression. "All my life, I studied what others forgot. Old stories speak of great builders who once shaped mountains and rivers. Their wisdom was buried through time. I found only a small piece of it, hidden in words that few cared to read." He paused. "I never used it before because the world was at peace. Now, it must be used to protect, not to destroy." Ilara's heart swelled with both pride and worry. "If this power came from the past, can we control it now?" He smiled gently. "As long as your heart leads this kingdom, nothing we build will turn against it." The next morning, the army of Dareth arrived at the valley. The sky was gray, and the ground shook under the weight of their machines. Iron walls rolled forward, and drums thundered through the air. The people of Valmar watched from the city walls, praying silently. Then the gates opened, and Ethan's creations stepped forward. Their silver bodies caught the sunlight, and their movements were as fluid as running water. Behind them, the soldiers of Valmar stood ready, hope stirring once again. The enemy laughed at first, thinking the shining figures were tricks to frighten them. But when the first arrow flew, the figures moved. In blinding motion, light flared across the battlefield, and the sky was filled with sound. The machines shielded the soldiers with bright barriers of energy. The enemy weapons broke against the invisible walls. From the towers, Queen Alara watched in awe as Ethan guided his machines with calm gestures and spoken words. Every move he made was precise, almost gentle, yet powerful enough to turn the flow of battle. His eyes were sharp, his voice filled with quiet command. The invaders who had once laughed now hesitated. The queen's husband, whom they had called weak, commanded an army unlike any they had seen. The people of Valmar began to cheer his name, their fear turning to courage. As night fell and the valley glowed with light and mist, Queen Alara finally understood what true power meant. It was not the sharpness of a sword or the size of an army. It was the calm will of a man who built not to rule, but to protect what he loved most. The Battle of the Valley had only begun, yet the air already burned with noise and fire. Queen Alara stood on the watchtower, her cloak whipping in the cold wind. From her high place, she could see the vast line of the enemy spreading across the hills, their dark armor glinting like oil. The smell of smoke rose from their torches as they marched closer, confident that Valmar would fall within the day. Below her, Ethan's creations waited in silent formation. They did not shout or tremble, they did not tire or fear. When the sun touched their silver forms, they glittered like streams of light. The soldiers of Valmar stood beside them, eyes wide with both longing and disbelief. No one fully understood the strange machines, but they trusted the man who had built them. Ethan moved among them, calm and measured. He spoke to the captains, giving short, gentle orders. There was no anger in his tone, only patience. He lifted his hands, and the great machines came to life. The sound was deep and smooth, like waves rolling over rock. Light spread through their bodies, and the ground seemed to hum beneath the weight of their power. When the first siege weapons of Dareth launched stones toward the city walls, Ethan looked up with quiet focus. The Silver Guardians raised their arms, and bright shields of energy flared into the sky. Huge stones met the barrier and broke apart into harmless dust. Gasps rose from both sides of the battlefield. Queen Alara's heart beat fast. She had seen soldiers fight many times before, but never anything like this. There was beauty in the rhythm of the defense. It felt less like war and more like music, the kind that carried both strength and sorrow. Ethan turned toward the queen for the shortest moment. Even from far away, she saw calm in his eyes, and that calm filled her with courage. He gave a signal, and the Silver Guardians began to move. They walked forward with graceful speed, each step shaking the valley floor. The enemy roared and charged, arrows filling the air like rain. The Guardians raised glowing shields to protect the soldiers of Valmar. Behind those shields, human archers fired through narrow gaps, hitting the advancing enemy with precision. The valley filled with sound, the hiss of arrows, the pounding of hooves, the ring of weapons striking metal. But still, the Silver Guardians moved with slow, steady purpose, never breaking their formation. Ethan stood near the front, guiding the flow of battle. He held a small, ring-shaped device in his hand, its center glowing softly. With every motion of his wrist, the Guardians responded as if they could hear his thoughts. When a group of enemy riders tried to circle around the flank, Ethan spoke one firm word, and two silver forms turned, blocking the path with walls of light. Hours passed. Smoke drifted across the valley, and the once green fields were scarred by fire and struggle. The people watching from the towers prayed silently, their eyes locked on the figure of their quiet king, who moved through the chaos with unshaken grace. Late in the day, when the sun began to sink, the enemy's commander pushed forward his largest machina, massive rolling engine made of black iron, spitting fire. The ground shook with every turn of its wheels. The soldiers of Valmar stepped back, fear rising. Even the Silver Guardians paused, as if testing the strength of their foe. Ethan stepped in front of them. His voice rang clear across the field. "Hold your lines." Then he whispered a command into the small device, and a soft blue light spread across the Guardians. They lifted their arms high, and streams of energy burst forward, striking the enemy engine. For a moment, the air turned white with heat and noise. Then, the great black machine stopped moving. Steam hissed as its metal sides began to crack. The soldiers of Dareth stared in shock as their most feared weapon fell silent. When the engine collapsed, a cheer rose from the walls of Valmar. The people shouted the Queen's name. Some even called Ethan's name, though many had once doubted him. But Ethan did not celebrate. Oh, he knew the battle was far from over. He turned to his guardians and gave one last order for the evening. Slowly, the silver figures moved back to their positions, forming a protective circle around the city as night fell. Queen Alara came down from the tower and met him at the gate. Her face was marked with ash, but her eyes shone with pride. "You saved us," she said softly. Ethan shook his head. "The people saved themselves. They believed when fear told them to surrender." He looked out at the dark horizon. "Tomorrow will test us again." Alara reached out and touched his arm. "Whatever comes, we will stand together." In the quiet that followed, only the wind and the faint hum of the guardians could be heard. The people began to light lanterns along the walls, their glow reflecting on the smooth metal bodies that now guarded them through the night. From beyond the hills, faint drums echoed once more. The army of Dareth had not retreated completely. More soldiers were gathering, waiting for dawn. But in the heart of Valmar, a new strength had awakened, one born not of swords or crowns, but of unity and hope. Ethan stood on the ramparts beside the queen, watching the stars. "The true strength of a kingdom," he said quietly, "is not in the fear it can cause, but in the peace it can protect." And as the silver guardians stood glowing under the pale moonlight, Queen Alara finally believed that those words might yet save them all. The long night slowly faded into a cold morning. Mist hung thick over the valley, heavy and still. The fires from the battle had almost gone out, leaving dark smoke curling up to the pale sky. Queen Alara stood on the wall with her cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She had not slept. Her eyes were fixed on the far hills where the army of Dareth waited in silence. It was only a matter of time before they attacked again. Behind her, the people of Valmar worked quietly. They brought food and water to the soldiers, repaired broken walls, and whispered prayers for strength. The Silver Guardians still stood around the city, calm and unmoving. Their polished bodies reflected the weak morning light, and the sound of their quiet hum comforted the citizens. Ethan walked along the walls, speaking softly to the captains and builders. Though he looked tired, his steps were firm. The night had shown everyone what he could do, and now no one dared doubt him. Soldiers saluted him when he passed, and even the nobles bowed their heads. But Ethan never acted proud. He smiled kindly and thanked them for their courage. Queen Alara turned when she heard his footsteps. "They are gathering again," she said, pointing toward the hills. "Their banners cover the horizon. I fear they will strike harder this time." Ethan looked into the mist. "They will not stop," he said quietly. "Not until they believe they can no longer win." But belief can change faster than a sword can strike. Alara frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" He rested his hand on the cold stone of the wall. "They think power is only fear and fire. But real power lives in something gentler. They will see it soon." Before the queen could ask, a horn sounded across the valley. The air filled with the deep rumble of drums. The enemy moved again. Long lines of soldiers marched forward, their armor dark and loud. Behind them rolled engines of war, trying to crush the will of Valmar under iron and smoke. Ethan turned to his guardians. The silver figures came to life once more, blue light running through their forms. The people of Valmar stood ready behind their shining defense. The queen raised her banner and called to her soldiers. Her voice echoed strong and clear, filled with courage. For Valmar, for peace, for each other. The battle began again. Arrows filled the air, engines roared, and the valley shook. The Silver Guardians moved like rivers of light. They formed shields to cover the archers, then spread apart to clear paths for the cavalry. Every moment seemed guided by an invisible rhythm, and that rhythm was Ethan. He stood near the center of the field, calm even as chaos raged around him. The device on his wrist glowed brighter than ever before, and small sparks of silver light drifted from his hands into the air. Each spark guided one of the guardians. Each breath he took seemed to shape the tide of the fight. The enemy fought fiercely, but confusion soon spread through their ranks. They could not find a way through the shining lines of defense. Their weapons broke, their engines faltered, and their commanders began to shout in fear. From her tower, Queen Alara watched the impossible unfold. Her husband, once quiet and unremarkable, stood like a beacon of calm power in the storm. She could not look away. She had always known he was wise. But now she saw the full truth. His greatness had never been hidden. only waiting for the moment when it was needed most. As the day wore on, the army of Dareth began to retreat. Ethan lowered his hands, and the battle slowly quieted. The Silver Guardians stopped where they stood, the light within them fading to a gentle glow. The air was still again, broken only by the cries of relief from Valmir's people. When the last of the enemy soldiers disappeared beyond the hills, a great cheer rose from the walls. The sound spread through the city like a wave of joy. Alara hurried down from the tower, her heart full, her eyes shining. She found Ethan near the gates, standing alone, looking out toward the open fields. "You have done it," she said softly. "The kingdom is saved." Ethan turned to her and smiled. "The people have done it," he said. "They believed in each other. They remembered what peace feels like." Alara stepped close to him, her voice trembling with emotion. "You hid such power for so long. Why?" He looked toward the distant horizon where the sun began to break through the clouds. "Because power means little without peace," he said. "If I had shown it before, it would have become another weapon. I wanted it to be hope instead." For a moment they stood together in silence. The Silver Guardians glimmered softly behind them, motionless once more. The wind carried the scent of clean air and the faint echo of music, as if the land itself was sighing in relief. That night, the people of Valmor filled the streets with songs and lanterns. They told stories of how the Queen's calm heart and her husband's mind of light had saved them all. Children ran between the glowing guardians, laughing. Ethan and Alara watched from the balcony. She smiled and said, "You have given them faith again." He shook his head gently. "No, they always had it. They only needed a reason to remember." The Queen laid her hand over his. "And what will you do now?" Ethan looked down at the city where laughter mixed with the songs of joy. "Now I rest," he said with quiet warmth. "For peace is the true victory. I will do everything I can to keep it." As the night deepened and the lanterns glowed like stars, the people of Valmor slept with hearts filled with hope. The quiet craftsman who became their greatest shield had not only saved their walls, but had taught them something even greater: that true power is not born from fear, but from love strong enough to stand unshaken.